You walk around this building and everyone is so supportive and so excited about what is happening with the Fever.
There is a question that nobody inside the Indiana Fever organization wants to answer, and the longer they avoid it, the louder it gets. What if the most dangerous thing in Caitlin Clark's career isn't a rival player throwing cheap shots on the court? What if the real threat is the organization whose jersey she wears every single night? That question used to sound extreme. It used to sound like the kind of hot take you'd hear from an angry fan on social media at 2 in the morning, but it doesn't sound extreme anymore. Because the Fever's own general manager, Lynn Dunn, just walked into a public interview and accidentally cracked open a mystery that the franchise has been desperately trying to keep buried for nearly a decade. She didn't mean to do it, she thought she was doing damage control. What she actually did was confirm the darkest rumors that have ever swirled around this franchise, and in doing so, she may have just revealed exactly what Caitlin Clark's future looks like if nothing changes. This story is not just about basketball, it's about a pattern. A ghost that haunts the Indiana Fever. A ghost that destroyed one brilliant career already and is now circling a second. If you're new here, hit that subscribe button right now because this is exactly the kind of story we dig into and you don't want to miss what's coming next. The phenomenon and the flashpoint. Let's start with what everyone already knows because the foundation matters before we get to the part that nobody is talking about. Caitlin Clark is not just a basketball player at this point, she is a cultural event. Single game she plays carries a weight that the WNBA has genuinely never seen before in its entire history. Ratings spike. Arena sellout analysts who spent their whole careers covering the NBA are suddenly glued to every Fever game, dissecting her every move. The spotlight on this woman is so intense, so completely unrelenting, that it would be suffocating for almost any athlete on the planet. And then came the moment that broke the internet, Chindy Carter's blindside hip check. Off the ball, unprovoked, a deliberate act of physical aggression that sent shockwaves through the sports world. It wasn't just flagrant, it was a message. It was a moment that turned a simmering conversation into a full-scale national debate. Former NBA champions weighed in. Sports radio burned for days. Social media footage was dissected frame by frame. The consensus that emerged from all of that noise was troubling. Clark is being targeted. Not randomly, not accidentally, but deliberately and repeatedly by veterans who resent what she represents. The fame, the money, the attention, the endorsement deals. The spotlight that follows her like a second shadow. She walked into a professional league as a rookie and immediately became its most important figure, and some of the women who had spent years grinding in relative obscurity were not happy about it. That part of the story got enormous coverage. But while everyone was watching the opponents, the sharper observers started noticing something that hit even harder. The questions stopped being about who was fouling her and started being about who was protecting her. The locker room looks wrong. Viral clips started circulating, not of opponents, of teammates. Moments where Clark went down and the help was slow, screens that were soft, body language that fell off. Individually, you could explain each clip away, but together, they painted a picture that was hard to ignore. The whispers about a fractured locker room dynamic went from fringe internet speculation to mainstream sports conversation almost overnight. Reporters started asking harder questions. Former players started reading between the lines publicly. The narrative shifted from the league is targeting Clark to something more uncomfortable. Is her own team actually behind her? And right in the middle of all of this chaos, with cameras pointed at the Indiana Fever from every conceivable angle, Lynn Dunn started giving interviews. She was trying to settle things down. She was trying to project calm and organizational control. But in doing so, she said some things that hit people who have long memories very differently than she intended. We'll come back to exactly what she said. Because first, you need to understand the ghost. Indiana's forgotten hero before Caitlin Clark, there was Stephanie White. And if you don't know that name, you need to because her story is the key that unlocks everything happening right now. In Indiana basketball circles, Stephanie White isn't just respected, she's royalty. She earned the Miss Basketball title for the state of Indiana, then went on to lead Purdue to collegiate glory. She was one of those rare figures that a state genuinely claims as its own. When she eventually returned to Indiana as the head coach of the Fever in 2015, it felt like destiny, the prodigal daughter coming home to lead her people. And in her very first season running the sideline, she did something that coaches spent entire careers chasing. She took a team that had no business being there and engineered a run all the way to the WNBA Finals, a 5-game series that had the whole league watching. First-year head coach finals appearance. The basketball world took notice immediately. She wasn't just a good story, she was genuinely brilliant, tactically sharp, forward-thinking in her offensive schemes, respected deeply by her players, and beloved by the city. The Indiana Fever had found their cornerstone, a young, homegrown coach who could guide the franchise from one era into the next, building something sustainable and lasting. Her future wasn't just bright, it looked borderline untouchable, so what happened next should have been impossible. The exit that broke logic. In 2016 mid-season, the announcement came without warning. Stephanie White was leaving the Indiana Fever to become the head coach of the Vanderbilt University women's basketball program. Read that again slowly and let it sink in. A coach who just took her team to the WNBA Finals in her debut season was walking away, not in the off-season. Not after careful deliberation and a new opportunity she couldn't pass up, but mid-season to go coach a college rebuilding project. In the sports world, that simply does not happen. Coaches sacrifice years of their lives grinding through low-paying assistant jobs, working insane hours, chasing the dream of leading a professional team. When you finally get there, when you actually take that team to a championship series in year one, Stephanie White looked at that reality clearly and made a decision. She would rather have total control over a lesser program than zero meaningful control over a bigger one. She left on her own terms before the situation got worse, and the organization let her go and immediately tried to move the story forward like nothing significant had happened. The problem is, something very significant had happened, and it was about to happen again. Lynn Dunn opens her mouth and changes everything. Fast forward to the present. The Fever are at the center of the sports universe. Caitlin Clark has made them relevant in a way nobody could have fully predicted, and the pressure inside that building is enormous. Lynn Dunn, the general manager, has been making the rounds, doing interviews, try to manage the public narrative, try and project confidence and stability. And in those interviews, she has said some things that are completely standard on the surface. She has spoken about the challenge of integrating a transformational player into an existing roster. She has talked about the complexity of locker room chemistry, the difficulty of aligning veterans and newcomers, the mental and emotional demand of operating under relentless media scrutiny. She has emphasized accountability and the need for everyone in the organization to be pulling in the same direction. To a casual listener, that's just a general manager speaking generalities, responsible sounding nothing language from a sports executive doing media. But to anyone who remembers the Stephanie White situation, to anyone who spent years quietly wondering what really happened in that locker room in 2016, those words land completely differently. Because she isn't just describing Caitlin Clark's situation in 2025. She is, word for word, describing the exact dynamic that insiders have always had forced Stephanie White out the door, the challenge of managing transformational talent, the fragility of locker room chemistry, veterans and the pressures of a massive spotlight, the need for organizational alignment that apparently wasn't there before. Lynn Dunn walked into those interviews thinking she was putting out fires. What she actually did would confirm, accidentally, unintentionally, but unmistakably, that the same core organizational dysfunction that destroyed the Stephanie White era is alive and active inside the Indiana Fever right now. She validated 8 years of whispers in a single media cycle. And if you're paying attention, that should terrify you. Because it means the problem was never fixed, it was buried, and now it's back under the brightest lights the league has ever seen. Before we go further, if this is the kind of deep dive you love, do us a favor and smash that like button. It genuinely helps more people find this content, and we've got a lot more coming. Christy Sides and the pattern repeating. Look at Christy Sides' situation right now, and tell me it doesn't feel familiar. She is the head coach of the most scrutinized team in women's basketball. She is tasked with managing the most famous player in the sport, navigating a media circus that operates at a completely different level than anything the WNBA has dealt with before, and simultaneously trying to build genuine team cohesion in a locker Room where, if the reports and viral clips are be believed, not everyone is fully committed to the collective mission. That is exactly where Stephanie White stood. The names are different, the player at the center is different, the era is different, but the structural conditions are almost identical. A franchise that appears unwilling or unable to make the hard internal decisions necessary to create a functional, unified environment around its most important asset. The question people are now openly asking is whether Christie Sides has the full, unconditional backing of her front office when things get difficult internally, whether she has the authority to make unpopular decisions that prioritize the team's long-term health over short-term political comfort, whether Lynn Dunn and the ownership group are willing to draw clear lines and enforce them, or whether, like what allegedly happened with Stephanie White, the coach is being left to navigate impossible politics largely alone. The pattern suggests the latter, and if history is any guide, we know where that path leads. The organization's actual track record. Here is the uncomfortable truth that the Indiana Fever front office does not want to discuss publicly. Their problem has never been acquiring talent. It has been what happens to that talent once it's inside the building. Stephanie White was genuine top-tier coaching talent. She approved it immediately, and by most accounts, she was pushed into an untenable situation, failed to receive the organizational support she needed, and ultimately made the rational decision to leave before it destroyed her career entirely. The franchise moved on. They found a new coach. They buried the story. Now they have Caitlin Clark, a talent so rare, so commercially significant, so culturally important that she may be the single most impactful player the WNBA has ever had. And the same cracks that appeared under Stephanie White are showing up again. Locker room tension. Questionable veteran dynamics. A front office try and manage the PR narrative rather than fix the actual structural problem underneath. You can't paper over a foundation crack forever. Eventually, the weight of what's sitting on top of it gets too heavy, and the whole thing gives way. The Indiana Fever have a generational opportunity in front of them. Caitlin Clark is the kind of player who comes along once in a lifetime, maybe once in a sport's entire history. The commercial potential she represents, the cultural reach, the ability to permanently elevate the league. It's all right there. And the organization seems to be fumbling it in slow motion, repeating the same mistakes they made before in a much higher stakes environment. What this means for Caitlin Clark's future. Now here's where the conversation gets genuinely serious. Right now, Caitlin Clark is locked into her rookie contract. She doesn't have immediate leverage to force a trade or demand a change. But we live in the era of player empowerment, and that era has made contracts feel increasingly like temporary arrangements rather than binding commitments. Players find ways out when they need to. Agents get creative, stars make their preferences known publicly, and let the pressure do the work. If the environment inside the Indiana Fever continues to deteriorate, if the locker room friction remains unaddressed, if the front office continues prioritizing optics over real solutions, if Clark continues to play in an environment where she can't fully trust the people around her, what happens when she reaches a point where she has leverage? Stephanie White made her choice the moment she decided a lesser situation with full control was better than a premier situation with none. She was a coach. She could leave and start over. Clark is a player, and the dynamics are different, but the fundamental calculation might not be. At some, if the conditions don't improve, the question becomes whether the most important player in women's basketball history decides that her best chance at winning and at thriving is somewhere else. The Indiana Fever do not have an infinite window to get this right. The problem isn't talent acquisition. They've proven they can attract incredible talent. The problem is culture. And culture is built from the top down through clear leadership, decisive action, and a genuine commitment to protecting what matters most. Now, there are serious questions about whether that commitment exists in Indiana. The cold case cracked open. What started as a conversation about a flagrant foul and some uncomfortable locker room clips has turned into something much bigger. Lynn Dunn's attempt to manage a PR crisis accidentally ripped open a wound that the Indiana Fever organization thought had healed long ago. She handed observers a thread that, once pulled, unraveled 8 years of carefully maintained silence about what really happened with Stephanie. And what it reveals is not a story about one coach or one player making difficult decisions. It's a story about a franchise with a systemic problem, a recurring inability to build and maintain the kind of internal environment where exceptional talent can actually succeed. They had it with Stephanie White and lost it. They may be in the process of losing it again, this time with the most consequential player in the sport's history watching from the center of the storm. The Fever's greatest adversary is a rival team. It isn't even the veterans who've been taking shots at Clark. It's themselves. It's the patterns they've never fully confronted, the decisions they've never fully made, the accountability they've never fully enforced. That's what the ghost of Stephanie White's departure has always been trying to tell anyone willing to listen. The question that now hangs over everything, over every game, every press conference, every locker room interaction, is whether the Indiana Fever will finally hear that warning or whether they'll repeat history one more time and lose something truly irreplaceable in the process. Is the greatest threat to Caitlin Clark's legacy not the opponent she faces on the court, but the organization she comes home every night? Drop your answer in the comments, because this debate is just getting started. And if you made it all the way to the end of this one, you already know what to do. Subscribe, hit the notification bell, and stay locked in. We're just getting started digging into what's really happening inside the Indiana Fever, and trust us, there's a lot more to uncover.